theory has to have a priority.
Capitalism and artificial intelligence are the same thing.
The dimension of the future has disappeared.
There is actually no representation anymore.
There is no final resolution to contradiction.
Militant proletarian snake handling over abysses never gets much wilder than this.
All right, everybody, welcome back to the Dangerous Maybe. And today, wow, we are in for a special conversation. We are joined by Nick Land and John Michael Greer for a conversation that has been years in the making. I just can't express how thrilled I am to have both of you here for this. Before anything else, I just got to give a shout out to James Ellis of Hermitix Podcast, because this conversation was an idea that he had been thinking about for a long time. And a few months ago on X, people were talking about it. And is this going to happen? Is this, and people were asking James, and James said that he's currently working on other projects and is busy. And so people tagged me and were like, hey, why don't you have them talk? And I would not have even considered this without James giving his blessing and his approval. So I talked to James and he gave me the thumbs up. And so anybody who's into theory, philosophy, the occult, check out James's channel. It's one of the best on YouTube. And hi, James. Thanks. So with that said, just thrilled for this. Before we get into it, Nance, what is up with you?
Oh, I'm hanging out. Today is a special day, significant day.
Tell them why.
For various reasons, but for me, my favorite reason is because it's Pi Day. Now I'm a Philistine. I'm not well versed in the occult and numerical significance, but I do know that pi is a significant number, and so I'm excited to be gathered here to celebrate mathematical significance, symbolic significance, and yeah, it's about time this conversation took place, and I think we'll get into time as well as other things as well. So I'm excited.
So as solemn providence, to use Nick's term, would have it, today is also Nick's birthday. So happy birthday, Nick. It's very special to be spending your birthday with you and having this conversation. So just it's Pi Day, it's Land Day, and it's conversation
You're
day.
a great present as far as I'm concerned. The best.
So, okay. There's a lot of great topics to be discussed here. As I was telling both of you, we know what people want from this. They want to see you to engage in a conversation. And so Nance and I are going to withdraw as much as we can while still having some questions. But there's just so much good stuff to talk about. I mean, we can have a discussion of politics. I mean, John, I was just reading The King in Orange. Absolutely loved it. I'm a working class thinker, so to speak. And so, it's an incredible.
Sorry,
book.
I just cut out then for a minute. I don't know.
You're
what
back. We can see you. And so, yeah, it just, I love the book, And so the politics, obviously is an interesting approach. This whole connection, Nance, you were talking, why don't you say the thing with hyperstition and
Yeah, the hyperstition and the magical element. I think for me, hyperstition really has always resonated in a material way. Like I see the material side of hyperstition, and I know a lot of practitioners and a lot of people view the process of acting to change the world, to bring the world more in line with a will. They see that in a way that maybe they would also see it in a material way, but there's a different element of it too. So I think there's a lot that we can get into discussing hyperstition versus magic.
Versus?
maybe
Okay.
yeah, maybe versus.
And magic.
So yeah, I mean, I guess I would just want to start off by saying, where do you want to start? Are there any topics in particular that you are inspired to have a conversation about?
Look, I'm itching to show John my diagram.
Let's start there. That's the perfect place to
Diagram.
begin.
I'm good with diagrams.
Let me just say, this is my anticipation. Like, you might think it totally gets everything wrong, but I was trying to understand what I thought would be happening here. And let me see whether I can get this in the screen. Whoa.
There it is.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, it's not quite. There we go.
There it is.
Okay.
Is it
let's
visible to
read it.
everyone?
Cybernetic yin yang. We have Nick Land and John Michael Greer on one side. On the Nick Land side, it's apocalyptic, biblical, and eschatological. Runaway predominates. And on the John Michael Greer side, we have cyclical, astrological, ecological, homeostasis predominates, and it's the yin and yang symbol. There is a seed of the other in each.
That seems like a very good basic summary.
You don't feel misrepresented by that?
No, not at all. Not at all. In fact, I'm very pleased to see that we're basically starting with at least some mutual understanding, because I would have characterized your thought as apocalyptic in nature, and as as focused on that kind of runaway process, which I don't tend to believe in, but I don't tend to believe it as a rule. I'm aware that it happens in some situations. I can think of several.
That's where you have a little black dot.
Exactly. Yes. I can think of some historical examples where societies have run themselves straight over a cliff. I can't think of any where they've run themselves straight to utopia, but that's another matter entirely.
Yes, utopia wouldn't be a category I would be wanting to defend.
I'm delighted to hear that.
That's actually Kurzweil, who originally I was going to try and use as this counterpoint to you, and maybe in some ways it's pure because he probably is a utopian like that.
Well, Ray Kurzweil. Ray. To my read, Ray Kurzweil is basically pushing American Protestant Christian fundamentalism under a very thin layer of technological drag. The whole singularity thing is in his presentation is basically just the second coming of Christ, except Christ is dressed up as a computer. You have, the robot.
That's probably what I'm saying too.
I think. Yeah, the robot bodies that we're all going to upload our consciousness into are the radiant bodies of the saved. Space is heaven. Point for point, the whole thing fits in. And mind you, if you want to believe in something like that, that's fine. But I would much rather, if you do it, go ahead and come out of the closet and be a fundamentalist Christian and slam your copy of the King James Bible around. I don't see much point in trying to pretend that technology is heading that way. But obviously, Kurzweil disagrees with me there.
Yes, I think that there's a lot of potential discussion material on that. because actually my son is a great fan of yours. In fact, annoyingly, he said, oh, if you so excited you're going to talk to JMG, tell him that I'm at least 80% more on his side than your side. So I would sort of forgive him that. But he said, so I was saying, look, there's lots of interesting things for us to talk about, but probably on AI, we're so far apart that it just might not be a productive zone of engagement.
I think that's
and he said, no, you've got it wrong. He said, talk about it as a myth and ask what's going on backstage behind the myth of progress and the Faustian tradition.
Okay, so your son has definitely been paying attention. That whole business, the whole, AI as myth, AI as, in fact, a myth that's been in circulation in the Western world for a very long time, the machine that thinks like a human being. I have my doubts that our current generative large language models are actually filling that role in the real world, but they certainly fill that role in mythology. I think they are also being propped up for another reason, which is that we have a fantastically overinflated bureaucratic system in the industrial world, especially in the United States, but not only there, of course. And it's become a major barrier to economic development, to economic anything. And so I think a lot of what's being done with the deployment of LLMs is an excuse to get rid of middle management. I mean, do we really does every single business in the United States need a compliance department whose whole job is to fill in quarterly or annual or monthly reports to some bureaucracy or other, certifying that they are complying with paragraph 6 subsection D blah 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 of such and such code? Now that's something an LLM can do extremely well, and so it's a way to prune the bureaucracy. I expect to see a lot of middle management, a lot of things, and the whole the image of the mythic image of the machine that thinks like a man becomes a really good politically acceptable excuse to do that pruning, which so badly needs to happen. I think that's one of the things that's driving the situation we're in now.
And sorry to be sort of stubborn on this, but beyond the sort of sociological level of explanation, do you see a sort of deeper and occult level of explanation about why? Because as you say, let's just bracket the question of what LLMs are actually going to do and just look instead.
I don't have the technical knowledge, so go ahead.
Yeah, so there's a kind of religious and cultural convulsion. I think maybe, again, you might think I'm exaggerating it a little bit, but it seems to me we're rolling into something that just at that level, just in terms of the cultural response, and I would say maybe the most important way of talking about it is to say, as an event in the history of religion, something immense is happening. I won't say unprecedented, because I think that would be just to kind of beg the question, and probably it's like that's where our contention on this would lie. But so there is this, as a religious phenomenon, something is happening here, irrespective of the actual foundation for it. And I would have thought that, as from the perspective of esotericism and the occult tradition, one would always say, well, look, if something is happening in religious history, something is happening at the level of at a higher level than simple human sociological reality.
No, go ahead.
No, I think that's a kind of, like, I'm happy with.
I think part of the issue, I run in very different circles from you, and I haven't seen much in the way of a religious response to the AI phenomenon. Just the people that I run with, the people that I'm in touch with, are mostly looking at as an economic and a technological and a political phenomenon. The only people I know who are really talking about it in religious terms are anthroposophists, followers of Rudolf Steiner, who are looking at it as the fulfillment of one of his prophecies of evil. There's this,
Right.
I forget the exact details, but there was one of his prophecies was that there would be this emergence of this great web by these vast spider-like beings midway between the mineral and the vegetable kingdoms, but capable of a powerful imitation of human thought, and they would cover the world with this web. I think it's the internet, actually, but there are anthroposophists who see this as the sort of incarnation of Ahriman.
So I can see why that would strike people as prophetic, for sure. I'm assuming that you must just at least tangentially have come across, one big sphere is the fact that among sort of committed, fairly sort of orthodox, that's to say not particularly wacky or esoteric Christians, there's lots of people are trying to track the Book of Revelation onto.
Onto. Is AI their latest focus? Okay. To some extent,
then
go ahead. I think I'm lost track.
So one more would be just that there's also this thing, which I think is a real thing in lots of like Silicon Valley and people working in that, of thinking. I mean, the most famous quote is obviously Elon Musk's, "We're summoning a demon." Peter Thiel has started giving these lectures, obviously, or has completed giving these lectures on the Antichrist. I think Silicon Valley is full of people, the stereotypical notion is we're creating a machine god. So these to me are all just testaments to the fact that there is something happening at this level of like. But am I to take it you're still skeptical about the?
No, it's simply that it's not something that I've seen much of. As again, the whole Silicon Valley, the high tech end of things is not a circle that I run with. I tend to, being kind of a Luddite myself, being the kind of person who doesn't own a cell phone and almost certainly never will. There's a lot of that takes place that I simply haven't seen, and so. To some extent, we're talking across a boundary between social worlds here, and that I'm taking all this in. I'm going, okay, this is very interesting. Much of it I was not aware of. It's it's a big world out there, and there are a lot of different subcultures in it.
Let me ask a question, John. Have you seen the discussion of Nick's work on the Tucker Carlson episode that he did with Conrad Flynn? Because it's really interesting because in that episode, they're discussing basically the perceived influence of the occult on Silicon Valley. And they basically say Nick is the philosopher of these guys. Whether or not the interpretation of Nick's work is spot on is up for discussion, but there is something in the air right now, which is this connection between the occult and AI technology. And even this is something that even my coworkers ask me about because they watch Tucker Carlson. And so it seems to be something that is starting to resonate more and more in just the average American's life, is this connection. Like, is AI technology bringing about the emergence of something akin to, digital demons? Is that the trajectory we're on?
The thing that concerns me there, of course, is that first of all, there are a lot of people in, certainly in American society, generally outside of the privileged classes, who treat AI as such as a lethal threat. or as such, just as the enemy. There's been a lot of loose talk about all the jobs we can get rid of, and that's them's fighting words in much of America these days. And so, to add on the religious dimension, well, I'm already very concerned that we're going to see active persecution of occultists in the United States. Probably not governmentally run, but like mob violence and so on. Partly that's because quite a few of the public occult groups, especially in the neo-pagan scene, have made no secret of their preference for one particular political party and their willingness to engage in what we can broadly call evil magic, cursing and hexing and death spells and things like that, all of which sets off a lot of very ancient reactions in people, and it's burn the witch time. So this is something I want to pay very close attention to. Obviously, I do not want to end my days tied to a stake. And I mean, I'm not joking when I say that. I'm not just sort of waving my hand saying, no, doing this is an exaggeration. I think people will die. I think there will be mob violence and people will be killed. And if the AI myth feeds into that, if people come to think of AI as a demonological phenomenon, and as a deliberately demonological phenomenon, here are these evil wizards of Silicon Valley who are deliberately, bringing an electro-Satan into manifestation. The blowback from that could be tremendous and extremely violent.
But I have to say, I think that the kind of what's the expression? The ship has sailed on that. I mean,
I know.
Like as Mikey says, this Tucker Carlson thing, just as a cultural moment, was extraordinary, and it's like the readiness for that, the appetite for it. So the person, his guest was a guy called Conrad Flynn, who's he's immense narrative and dramatic skills, and he'd spun this really very impressive story, just as a piece of kind of dramatic literature. It was extremely impressive. And it, to me, was obvious that it was slotting so perfectly into a certain set of expectations that I have to be a little bit, well, a twofold thing. Firstly, I have to, on the sociological level, have to be a little bit skeptical about whether it's really plausible to think that we are in a position to kind of quarantine a certain type of cultural and religious episode from taking place. Like it just, that might just be naive.
Oh yeah.
And on a more elevated level, it seems to me that, again, that is to presuppose that there are not higher forces at work. That it is just a human sociological phenomenon that we can turn on and off, as if we were in control of the history of religion from this side, which seems to me, just from an occult point of view, to be very naive.
No,
and that if you're dealing with a genuine, let me say, like whatever amount of scare quote spiritual phenomenon, it's that it's not a human psychological phenomenon. It's something at a higher level than that that's taking place, and therefore not really. We don't have an off switch for that.
Oh no, I'm not arguing with that for a moment. My concern is not, my thought is not that we, however that word is defined, that we can stop this. It's that we damn well better be braced for it, because these are signs and indications of a potentially very traumatic series of events in the occult community now for the last 175 years. It's been possible to talk ever since Eliphas Levi's time. It's been possible to talk about occultism openly in public without too much trouble. You might lose your job, That nearly happened to William Wayne Westcott, one of the Golden Dawn founders. You can have various social penalties inflicted on you, but you can get away with it. And Aleister Crowley, man, good heavens, despite his efforts to define himself as the wickedest man in the world, et cetera, he died peacefully in bed at an advanced age. That is not always something that happens. And I think those of us who are involved in occultism, especially those of us who are publicly known to be involved in occultism, need to be aware of where some of these things are trending, and both on a spiritual and shall we say demonic level, and on the human level of social trends, of political trends, of religious trends, which which reflect on our plane what's going on other planes. So no, I'm not suggesting that we ought to stop this. I'm saying we need to have our eyes wide open and be ready to do what smart occultists did 500 years ago, which is get the hell out of Dodge when things start becoming problematic, and be prepared to make tracks in a hurry and stay out of the way of rampaging mobs and things.
Right.
I mean, is it a thing where, especially here in America, John, where Christian fundamentalism is still the religious default for most Americans? This is something I've been, concerned about too, where there's this growing sense of, and part of it has a lot to do with the Tucker Carlson thing, because again, so many people in my life saw it and started asking me questions because they know I talked to Nick, and it is this thing where they're starting to go, wait, is technology itself a form of the Antichrist? Is it like this is very concrete for a lot of Americans, where the Antichrist is real. He is a figure who's going to show up. And, when we start talking about how, the blockchain and these new economic technologies, you could be barred from economic activity, right? So you would have to get a seal of approval to engage in economic. Americans are starting to go, all of this seems to be lining up for the Antichrist. And I see your concern why certain people who engage in certain alternative forms of religion would have to be concerned about the Christian response to this, the American Christian response to this.
I would also point out that the same thing will be happening in areas with a large Muslim population. Islam also has Islamic fundamentalism and Christian fundamentalism. They disagree with each other, but they have much more in common than they have separating them. I think one of the reasons they're at each other's throats is sibling rivalry. And so there are large parts of Europe, for example, where I could see a Muslim response along the same lines.
What do you think of that?
Can I ask?
Go ahead.
Whether how you see, which I thought was a very interesting remark, and I've got a lot of sympathy with it. It would be interesting to see exactly what we could agree on this. But when you were talking about Ray Kurzweil, and you were saying that his basic vision of this kind of ascent to singularity, which obviously he's very explicit at deliberately sort of, it's almost a parody of language. I mean, he called the end is near, whatever it is, the is near. It's a deliberate sort of invocation of kind of Christian apocalyptic language. And so you said, which I think, there is a large amount of truth to that. His vision of the technological future is very deeply informed by our religious tradition. And the relations are probably really complicated because, it might even be said that this technological trajectory is only imaginable through our religious tradition or something like it. I think we then have to get into all questions about the relationship of especially Anglo-Protestant Christianity to liberalism and to capitalism and to these kind of social drivers. But there's definitely something at least to that. So it's a double level thing. And so in a certain sense on that level, you're sort of identifying this particular trend in religious history with you're identifying it as our religious tradition. I mean, I would say for shorthand Anglo-Protestant. I don't know, maybe you want to kind of be more specific or whatever, or general. And then on the other hand, you have this sense of the religious tradition as being precariously inhibited witch burners. I'm not trying to caricature what you're saying, but it's like this potential for persecution that, obviously the first wave of witch trials, again, exactly where you identify that in terms of religious orientation, but it's clearly part of European Christianity. And I'm assuming that is the model for this subsequent epoch of persecution that you're envisaging. And I'm just wondering how you think those two different ways, or at least to me at the moment, they seem different, of articulating the relationship between this process and the religious tradition articulate.
Okay. Well, I'm going to have to drag in another name here, and the name is Oswald Spengler.
Oh yeah, of course.
Yeah, the Spenglerian model has just simplified and tweaked to suit my own views on things. Ages of reason are a temporary phenomenon in the life of every civilization. We had ours come in with the dawn of the early modern period, the late Renaissance. We have, and it's now winding down. And one of the things that follows an age of reason is what Spengler calls the second religiosity. A return to the traditional religious forms as a bulwark against social and psychological chaos. And it is, and I want to say, this is seriously a degeneration of religion from its spiritual dimension to a human social dimension, which is why it never lasts that well. The second religiosity lasts for a few centuries and then it gutters out. Think of late classical paganism. It was very much an elite tradition. It was very strongly propped up by the Roman state. It was very strongly encouraged because it sort of maintained the social ideologies, and it was essentially powerless in the face of the rising spiritual trends that ultimately were absorbed by Christianity, which were drawing on something that was not simply social, not simply ideological in nature. In the same way, I see Christianity now, here in the United States especially, we have a lot of people who are turning to various Christian churches. And in many places explicitly they're saying, look, this is the foundation of our civilization, not this is a reality of the spirit. This is the foundation of our society. This is the foundation of our political system. It's very much what Spengler was talking about. Now, what we also know, if we observe the history of Christian apocalypticism, is that it tends toward heresies. That is to say, people will take the basic ideas and run in various strange directions with them. That's what I see Kurzweil doing. I see him as a heresiarch, if you want to use the grand old term. He has taken a set of Christian metaphors, of evangelical Protestant, Anglo-American Protestant metaphors, and run with them in a particular direction. Karl Marx did the same thing. Marxism is absolutely a Christian heresy, and it's one of the more extreme Christian heresies in that it gets rid of God, or rather simply renames him dialectical materialism. But the same story is being told, the story of fall and redemption and all the usual stuff. But Kurzweil is taking these metaphors in a distinctive way. He is mapping them onto the material world in a way that has been very distinctive in recent of heresies in recent times. Who is it that used to talk about immanentizing the eschaton? Okay. I know Robert Anton Wilson had a lot of fun with that in the Illuminatus trilogy, but I forget the name of the German-American political philosopher who used to talk about immanentizing the eschaton, meaning taking.
Oh yeah.
Eric.
You mean recently?
This was in the Vogelin. Yes, Eric Vogelin. That's the guy. Yes, in the 1950s and 1960s, taking a set of spiritual principles and applying them too literally to events in the material world. Saying this computer is Jesus is immanentizing the eschaton. Saying this revolutionary party is Jesus is the same thing.
Yeah.
And so,
sure.
I see Kurzweil as very much caught up in immanentizing the eschaton in a particular way, as developing a very interesting Christian heresy. But as the second religiosity builds, Christians tend to crack down on heresies rather more harshly than they do even on other religions. So we'll see what happens. But that's the relationship that I see there.
Sorry, I'm just slightly digesting because so yes, this second religiosity, which is actually predominantly sociological and not religious, and it's not religious. One of the reasons it's not religious is the fact that it doesn't actually see the process coming out of the zone of religious attention, but sees it coming out of sociological processes. So in a way, like for Kurzweil, very clearly, he doesn't, even though he's making elusive fun of these religious references, he's obviously like, it seems to be actually a kind of secular scientific materialist. It doesn't, he has no indication of suggesting that something from the other side of singularity is flowing back into history and creating these phenomena, creating the appearance of a kind of secular materialist technological process where actually what is coming from.
I wonder why he didn't do that. I mean, it's who was it? Théâtre Chardin made that argument that the singularity, what the reality that exists after the omega point reaches back through time to bring itself into being. And I hadn't really thought about the connection between Théâtre Chardin and
that for sure is a religious conception.
Oh yes, yes.
So which escapes your notion of the second religiosity. Like insofar as those kind of ideas are spreading, that we're talking actually then about a genuine religious episode in the culture, not simply this sociological return to religion as a social control opportunity.
And both of those happen. Both of those happen in the decline of a civilization. Again, we have the example of late classical paganism and the various new religions of the time. In the same way, I think there's a major ferment stirring of genuine religious sensibility, genuine religious perception in our time that is pushing in new directions, that is not just rehashing the current metaphors of Christianity, but is looking toward genuinely new things. But that's typically happening on the fringes, as such things do. It will move through the crawl spaces and I expect to see it in the lower classes, where so much of the second religiosity is middle class and up. One of the things that because I have a lot of connections in weird places, the number of American rednecks I know who are pagans. Okay, we are talking good old boys, beer in one hand, shotgun in the other, and they worship Odin and Thor, or they're druids, or they practice what the pagans of the more privileged classes call trailer trash Wicca. It's a growing thing now, and so there will be more. There will be many more and many stranger things I foresee coming out of this as the middle class, upper middle class, as the classes of privilege gradually move more and more into the second religiosity, because that's what they want. They want something that will bulwark their world, that will provide a framework in which they can continue to exist in a purely sociological level. It's a very common historical pattern.
But it doesn't sound like either of those two broad categories that you're working with here, either of them are in the place to be, I don't know how to say, possessed by this Teilhard de Chardin style religious response to this techno-economic process. It's like, you have this control sociology thing, and you have a kind of neo-pagan. And unless I'm missing something, neither of those are producing a Teilhard de Chardin type response. Whereas in a dark way, Conrad Flynn, and insofar as he was able to, I mean, I don't really see Tucker Carlson as a deep religious thinker, but they definitely were, in these terms, they were in the Teilhard de Chardin, because they were saying there is stuff coming out of the singularity. So it's not control religion. It's not a kind of neo-pagan retreat from it, or I don't know how you would want to characterize that. It was definitely a full religious response of a certain, maybe highly problematic kind to these events.
I noted the redneck neo-paganism purely because very few people I've noticed among the intellectual classes realize what's going on in the American backwoods right now. I don't think that's the only thing that's going on by a long shot. It's simply the one that I happen to know about. And so there could be a whole bunch of things out there, in various random corners of North Carolina and Yorkshire and West Australia, or various other corners of the world, burbling away right now, that will become some of these may become the great religions of 1,000 years from now. And will some of them relate to this, this singularitarian vision? I don't know. One of the things that I like to think about is imagining a bunch of educated Roman scholars with a good background in religion sitting around trying to imagine the religion that was going to rise with the coming of the Piscean Age. Because they had a good sense of the precession of the equinoxes. They had the notion that each equinoctial age, each of the ages had a religious dimension. I don't think they could have possibly dreamed of Christianity or Islam. And so we're in the same situation. We're trying to say, okay, what is likely to come? What new religious ferment is going to emerge out of the decline of our civilization? And I don't think we can guess. I don't think we could possibly have a clue. Not least because, again, as you have been very sensibly pointed out, these are not things that human beings do. These are things that descend to the human level from elsewhere. And so what does that elsewhere have in mind? Maybe H.P. Lovecraft was right after all, and the next religious revelation will have more in common with Cthulhu than with anything we've seen so far. I'm okay with tentacles, so that's fine. But we don't know.
Yeah. So you definitely, I mean, this is something that I assumed, and based on your interest, had taken. But I'm just going to ask this just to get it completely locked in. Is that you identify sort of unreservedly, really, with the kind of astrological aeonology that you find I don't know what you think of this book, but I find really well thrashed out in this book, Hamlet's Mill.
Ah, yes. If you hadn't brought up that book, I would have. I don't know if exactly how to read it. One could read it as one of history's great hyperstitions, but it certainly seems to work. If you look at the religions of the Piscean era, I'll make the joke. There's something fishy about all of them. Okay.
Right.
If each religion does seem to correspond, or each age, each religious sensibility. We have in the Piscean era all these religions that focus on compassion. We have all these religions that focus on doctrine. One has to believe the right thing. And the community is central rather than individual. And there's a whole bunch of very Piscean factors here. Now that we're moving into the Aquarian age, if you will, the symbolism there suggests something more individualistic, something more eccentric, something that is less focused on compassion and more focused on freedom, something less Neptunian and more Uranian, if you will. And how exactly that will express itself, I don't know. Will it express itself that way? Well, I don't know. But so far, it's a model that seems to work. And, all those people obsessing about the age of Aquarius, if nothing else, they've built up a certain pattern in their own minds. And even when that's, garbled up together with, hippie beliefs along the, the song from Hair, sympathy and understanding and all that kind of stuff. And Hamlet's Mill, by the way, has been a huge influence on my own thinking. And so I was very pleased that you brought it up. I'm very pleased that you know it.
So I'm forgetting exactly what the length of an year is. Is it 2,126 years or something?
2,160. 2,160 years is the official length. The estimates vary from source to source, but that's been the traditional length for a long time. So yeah.
So potentially, because obviously one of the differences between us on these questions is you have a much more generous time frame generally. So when you're talking about the near future, it's often actually in centuries that you're talking. And so we're really the Piscean Aeon still has over a century to play out, probably, if one's being strictly eonological about it. Do you think that's right?
Well, that's something that there's been a lot of bickering about over the years. When did the Piscean era begin? Back in the early 20th century, there were a lot of people who argued that the Aquarian age had actually begun in, November of 1879. And a case can be made for that. If you think of Uranus as the ruling planet of Aquarius, okay, what do we have coming on after 1879? Well, we have the emergence of electronics technology. Uranus rules electronics. We have the emergence of sexual minorities as a significant cultural presence. Uranus is the planet of gay and lesbian culture. Back not all that long ago, one of the polite ways to talk about, one of the polite terms that we use for gay men was Uranians, in fact. We have the emergence of ideologies that focus on individual freedom above all else. That's a very Uranian thing. And there's a range of other factors. So I don't see it as a line so much as a transition zone that we've been in for some time now. And yes, it will doubtless be quite a while until it actually finishes.
So it's not like you're saying now that you want to push the origins of the Piscean age back several centuries BC.
There are people who claim that it does go back. There are people who would claim that it's not the year zero that's the turnover, but that it began sometime in a century or so before then. I don't know. Certainly, I would say, though, that we seem to be in a transitional state right now, and there's a lot of Piscean energy and a lot of Uranian energy, and we don't actually know that much about the astrology of the great ages. There's been whatever was known in ancient times. Hamlet's Mill is a collection of fragments.
I mean, one of the most striking and, to put it mildly thought-provoking elements of this for me is, I think it's Virgil reporting a sailor. And I think this is very much around the birth of Christ, where he's reported saying, "Great Pan is dead," completely independently, obviously, of any knowledge of what is happening in ancient Palestine or whatever it is.
It was Plutarch. It was Plutarch actually, but it was in the reign
Plutarch,
of the Emperor Tiberius, which is the right place, of course. So yeah. However you want to put that, yes, that's definitely a marker. And so one way or another, we're in the zone. When the exact moment happens, we may never know.
So,
but
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
No,
go ahead.
Okay, so we do have a couple questions that I think we would like, to see you guys talk about it, at least a little bit. Look, in Nick's work and CCRU's work, there is a diagram famously called the Numogram. And this could end up being like a long 2-hour long detour, and I don't intend for it to be that, but I'm just curious if you have thought about the Numogram or have any interpretations of it against the background of your familiarity with the occult.
Is that directed toward me?
Yes. Sorry.
Okay. Well, I treat it as one of the many variant versions of the Kabbalah. And I believe that would be that would correspond to that. There are a lot of them out there. There are various people insist this is the true Kabbalah. It's like saying what's the true language. Okay, the Kabbalah is a tool. It's not a truth. It's a way of talking about symbolism, a way of assembling symbols. And back in the day, 100 years ago, every different esoteric order had its own way of applying, for example, the tarot to the tree of life or what have you. Many of them had variant positions of paths. And so the fact that CCRU came up with their own version of the Kabbalah based on the number pad was nothing that unusual. It seems to have worked. It seems to have gotten results. I haven't gotten particularly deeply into it simply because, I originally learned the Golden Dawn version of the Kabbalah when I was studying that. Later, when I studied with my main teacher, John Gilbert, he had his own exceedingly eccentric version, which is what I use these days. If I ever had to work with a bunch of people who were doing the CCRU work, I would familiarize myself with the Numogram and go from there. But it's purely a matter of I haven't had that opportunity, and I haven't really had that need. So, in the same way, I haven't done a lot with the French version of the Kabbalah, which is its own eccentric thing, as you would expect. There are various ways to take 10 points and assemble them into a structure, a grid into which you can connect various patterns of symbolism. And it's like Rudyard Kipling said in one of his poems about tribal poems, there are 69 ways of constructing tribal lays, and every single one of them is right.
Nick, any response to that interpretation?
Well, I mean, this touches on something that I'm hoping can be a theme at some point. I'm not really sure the best time to introduce it. It's tied up very much with which I just love your little phrase, and I'm just going to abbreviate it or to give the acronymic of TSW.
Yeah.
I'm sure you know.
TSW. This stuff works. We'll be polite while we're on the air.
Okay, yeah. Very well caught. I didn't think of doing that. Which is something that you're probably coming from very different places. I've converged extremely with you on this. I mean, I won't go into the weeds on this because it's not really relevant, but for me, it was on the question of different gematria ciphers. So having been through a phase where the predominant CCRU gematria cipher, which we call alphanumeric Kabbalah or AQ, I was a zealous sort of pit bull about this thing, you know what I mean? And trying to insist that it was the only way of doing gematria in English. I've gradually moved to an alternative position, which I've already talked to these guys about, which is that every channel that can be used is going to be used. And if you don't think that, you're looking at things the wrong way around. Stuff's coming the other way. So if you can relax about the fact that if you're competent enough to understand how a communication channel would function, you can be completely confident that stuff coming the other way will be competent to understand how that works. So yeah, sorry, this doesn't really go anywhere particular except just to say that it's what you were saying about the Numogram. Really, it's like there's no need to get jealous about particular paths of approach of these things. It's just like, I do think that the TSW criterion is really the only one that matters.
Yeah, exactly. I'd liken some of the quarrels that you see in the Kabbalistic scene with quarrels. Imagine a Frenchman and a German and an Englishman having a big knockdown, drag-out fight over whether the four-legged animal barking at them is un chien, un hund, or a dog. Well, but yeah, there are different channels. Alan Greenfield has written several books pushing this really exotic Thelemite gematria system, which he uses to interpret communications from UFO occupants from various sources, and he gets a fair amount of actual straightforward sense out of it. That was the point where I really stopped and said, okay, so any of these things will work.
Yes, I mean, I guess you probably shouldn't be completely a prioristic about it, and it's like, but on the other hand, it's much harder to see why they wouldn't work than why they would.
If there's someone or something on the other side trying to communicate, that someone or something seems to be very good at picking up the language you want, you're trying to use, and using that language.
And in fact, getting the language that you think that you've come up with into your hands.
Yeah.
Nick, you recently, a couple days ago even, you said that demons seem much more likely to communicate than angels, and that was something I've been thinking about since. I just wonder if that's relevant to this discussion of channels.
I don't. It's not directly, but it is something I'm interested in. It was basically, if I can just risk boring John with this, it's like I was watching a video of a quite celebrated Catholic exorcist, and I was extremely struck by the fact that he got himself into a position where he could just spend a large amount of his time talking to demons quite intensely with complete church approval, and so he would just say, and I was talking with Satan, and we went into this particular theological question, and he's literally just saying, I'm getting a deep dive theological lesson from the Prince of Darkness, and the church authorities have said being completely okay. And it's like, what is the difference actually between that and some completely some completely socially ostracized type of kind of satanic occultism? I mean, it's like the practice is basically identical up to a certain point, at least. Sorry, that's basically again a complete.
Nick, what was the name of this you were watching?
The guy is called. It's an amazing name. I love it. He's called Father Chad Ripoga.
Father Chad. I like that.
Yeah, no, lots of people were appreciating that. And actually, he's an American Catholic, obviously. And he, goes to his kind of exorcistic rites carrying. So he showed at the start of this interview, he takes out some, I forget the name of it, some very impressive handgun, and he and the co-host are kind of examining with great enthusiasm this sidearm that he always has. So a lot of cinematic potential.
I like that. Well, my understanding, and those with more knowledge of the history of magic can correct me here. My understanding is that much of the tradition of evocatory magic in the Western world actually came from Catholic exorcistic traditions. The idea seems to have been that priests who were functioning as exorcists were going, okay, well, since we have the demons here, what can we do with them? Since we're going to be binding them and extracting them from people they've possessed or banishing them from places, can we do something else with them while we're here? And it just kind of went from there.
Yeah, so, no, for sure. It's a very interesting continuum.
So Father,
obviously,
Father Chad is very much in the grand tradition in a certain sense.
Yeah, and it's a revered tradition. Like one of the references that I was maybe hoping to touch on in our conversation is the Testament of Solomon, where the first temple. I mean, of course, this is not canonical scripture or whatever. That's but still a very influential text and consonant in many ways with the kind of Solomonic legends or whatever we want to describe them. And so, he has this kind of binding ring and summons legions of demons to get them to build the first temple. So the holiest site, the kind of original holiest site of the whole tradition, is actually constructed by demons that are under some kind of occult management. So all the later demon summoning, it's like completely under the wing in a way of this original process that could not be more endorsed. I mean, it's like, I take it no one is saying, oh, there's something sketchy about the first temple because it was built by demons.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. Yeah. Well, there's a lot of very strange demon lore in the Jewish tradition in particular. There were certain demons who were held to have been converted to Judaism. Asmodeus, for example, the claim that I read was he was converted to Judaism and actually was killed in the pogroms at the time of the First Crusade. He was caught in the Rhineland and killed along with a lot of Jews. Go figure.
So he somehow been incarnated in the flesh.
He was apparently so. Apparently that was part of the. There is a lot of strange stuff in the older levels of the spiritistic traditions of the Jewish faith, and also you find it in early Christianity. I think of I forget which one of the Desert Fathers was accosted at one point by a satyr who requested to be baptized. And there was this long discussion about it was like Saint Jerome or somebody like that. It's in one of his early lives, that there were all of these creepy creatures supposedly running around, the Christian world at that time that were not quite spiritual and not quite material. The same kind of things you see in Celtic traditions around the fairies and so on. They're not embodied the way we are, but they're not bodiless by any means. And so, yeah, that would take us down any number of other rat holes. And I don't have any explanations, just the fact that there's a lot of questions that I think a lot of our modern thought doesn't really address.
So maybe this is a good moment to pivot just a little bit. Both of you have thought intensely about politics, and John in particular. I mean, like I say, this great book here thinks about the role that magic and the cult has in relation to political power. I think in the books about the 2016 election of Donald Trump and what role magic played in that. Nick, I mean, the concept of hyperstition has gone beyond the capture of the CCRU and has, in a sense, hyperstitioned itself into something greater. And people often view things like the election of Donald Trump as a fiction that made itself real. Nobody could have even envisioned prior to 2016 Donald Trump being president. It was laughable, and yet it was a fiction that found a way to make itself real. I'm curious to see what you guys have to say to one another in relation to the role that hyperstition or magic, however we want to define it, or say that they're not the same thing. I mean, John, I have this quote from your book where you provide the helpful and I would say the classic definition. On page 4, you say magic is the art and science of causing change in consciousness in accordance with will.
I quote that from The Unfortunate, by the way.
Right.
That's not my invention.
Right. It's interesting, though, because hyperstition doesn't seem to fit that definition of magic, precisely because hyperstition isn't really will-oriented, at least not a personal will. So yeah, I just think this would be interesting.
There's the trap that people fall into. The Unfortunate's definition does not specify whose consciousness, and it does not specify whose will. It does not say magic is the art and science of causing change in your consciousness in accordance with your will, or in someone else's consciousness. You know, it's wide open. It is, among other things, open to wills that are other than human and will-like phenomena in, we can use the old-fashioned occult term, egregores. We can also look at collective wills of people. I mean, one of the things that sort of brought the Donald Trump phenomenon into existence was that there was a very large section of the American population whose viewpoints were completely excluded from the political landscape and from the cultural conversation at the time. And that segment of the American people found a voice in a washed up reality TV star and wrestling promoter. Is it absurd? Well, American history general is pretty absurd. So yes, but there was a lot of collective will going on there, and it pole vaulted Donald Trump straight into the White House.
How does that? I mean, does that track for you, Nick? I mean, do you see there being a hyperstitional dimension to the rise of Trump in American politics?
Well, at the risk of sort of slithering off the hook a little bit, I kind of want to take your question and shift it into this other context.
Okay.
Maybe I can be dragged back to it from after that, which is one of the things I really wanted to talk to in this conversation, is like the peculiar time structure of the history of secret societies and occultism generally. I know that this is obviously true of the Druids, so it's like would, of course, more modern Druidism, where I think it is most clearly seen as like the origins of Hermeticism, with so many things that I think are really important parts of this discussion come together, which occurs in the Renaissance, and immediately retrospectively extrapolates this vast tradition back to Hermes Trismegistus, such that Hermes Trismegistus is actually supposed to be the common wellspring of the thought, both of Plato and Moses. And I'm not saying that the notion of hyperstition at all is adequate to this. I think this is something more architecturally intricate and ultimately, I would say, more interesting. But there still seems to be the same issue about the role of a certain kind of fiction in the production of some real, extremely sort of energetic historical process, you know? And so I guess immediately I would be interested in, you know, what you thought about that in terms specifically of Druidism, and then more generally as something that, you know, do you think it's something that could be generalized to the operation of secret societies and occult orders?
It is
something like this happens.
It's something they certainly do. With regard to the history of Druidry, very much so. What you had was a group of British eccentrics. You know, we've never seen anything come from those before. A group of English eccentrics in the 18th century who were looking for spiritual alternatives to the rather barren Protestantism and the rather barren scientific materialism of the age, and who set out to reinvent the teachings of the ancient Druids based on what little was known at the time, and proceeded to do it so powerfully that people are still seeing 18th century Druids in their white robes projected back onto Stonehenge, projected back into ancient temples. We know very little about the ancient Druids. We know, I mean, it comes to us 15 pages of documentation, and half of it contradicts the other half. Nearly everything that you think of when you think of the Druids, you know, the bearded guy in the white robe with the oak leaf crown at Stonehenge, of course, or underneath an oak tree. All of that's an 18th century invention, but it propagated itself back through time as it propagated itself forward. And where many other little eccentric English spiritual phenomena just kind of that rolled over and died after a generation or so, Druidry is still around. It managed to find a long-term constituency. And I think the fact that it was successfully able to project itself backward enabled it to project itself forward as well. So that's that's an example very comparable to what happened with Hermeticism, where, you know, you have this one battered volume of Greek literature landing in the hands of Marsilio Ficino in 15th century Florence. And from that, he conjured into existence this vast chain of sages dating back to the dawn of time. And then everybody wanted to join in the chain, and so it propagated itself forward by propagating itself backwards. Is that something that secret societies do? It's something they try to do quite routinely. How often do they succeed? That's the big question. Sometimes they fail miserably. You know, there were a lot of the secrets doing the secret society thing. Secret societies are by and large the thing you do when you don't have a lot of political power or social influence. When the great example here is the United States. That's another nation that was literally founded by secret societies. The Committees of Correspondence, the Sons of Liberty, they were both mostly staffed by Freemasons, but Freemasons aren't supposed to engage in politics, so the guys simply took the methods, organized a couple of separate other organizations. The Committees of Correspondence then morphed into the United States Congress. The Sons of Liberty, we call that the United States Army today. Okay, the Navy started out as a gaggle of pirates, but we don't have to get into that. But so because they had basically invented a country and invented this image, they didn't really backdate it to the dawn of time, and I'm not sure why. But the United States is one of the great examples of a nation that was created by a conspiracy. But for every one that succeeds, there are many others that fail, or there are those that succeed for a little while. I think of the Thule Gesellschaft in Germany, which spun off a little political group called the German Workers' Party originally, found a guy named Adolf Hitler as their front man, and away it went. They managed to conjure something into being all right, but they did it badly and it blew up in their faces. The 12-year Reich ran through its history, and that was that. Many, many other societies have failed to do so. On the other hand, you have the example of Ireland, which the imagination of an independent Ireland, by reinventing the Irish past and projecting itself forward in the future, Ireland's an independent nation now because that happened. So it can be done. It's not always, again, there are many examples that have flopped, but there are some that have succeeded.
Yes.
Now, full disclosure, I'm a Freemason. I belong to a lot of secret societies, so I'll make the secret sign here so everyone knows.
I've already blown your cover with these guys before you arrived.
Oh, well, there you go. Okay.
You reached the loftiest peak of, I think it's 3 magical orders, is that right? The Golden Dawn, the Masons, and American Druidry.
Well, I have not reached the pinnacle of Masonry. I'm merely 32nd degree. I would have. Yes, I would have to go. I have to get 33rd degree to be at the pinnacle of American Masonry, and I ain't there yet, and I have no idea if I ever will. That's invitational only. And my standing in the Golden Dawn is complex because I've been involved in several different orders, and my rank varies from unit to unit. On the other hand, yes, I have been. I am fully initiated in 3 different Druid orders. I have been the presiding officer, the Grand Archdruid of the Grand Grove of the Ancient Order of Druids in America, and that and 650 will get you a cup of coffee. But I do, there was one of the conspiracy cultures out there at one point, figures out there, had this grand chart of the uber conspiracy to end all conspiracies. You can tell this was big because the Illuminati were like 6 levels down. Satan was at the top. The Rothschild family was directly below them. And the next below that were the 13 top druids in the world. So I think I may actually outrank the Rockefellers.
So what was the source of this hierarchy?
I found it on the internet. They had this vast pyramidal structure, of course, the eye, Satan being the eye in the triangle and all that. But it just went on and on and on. It was great. I have not read anything so batshit crazy since what was her name? Inquire Within. Christina Stoddard, who was a Golden Dawnie, and then freaked out and suffered a nervous breakdown and became one of the great authors of conspiracy in England in the early 20th century under the name Inquire Within. The book you want to find is Light Bearers of Darkness. It's a great title. Oh. And it's nuts. Did you know that the Girl Scouts are part of the one great conspiracy?
I imagine not at the highest level.
She doesn't make that clear. I have my suspicions. I think those cookies that they sell have strange psychoactive properties, and they're designed to control all of our minds. Yeah.
What? So, Nance, what do you think? I'm sure you have some thoughts and questions.
I mean, I think initially the AI world, we have people like Blake Lemoine and Anthony Lewandowski. Anthony Lewandowski, I believe, created a church called Way of the Future. And he's a former Google engineer. Mm-hmm. He was involved in the self-driving cars. Blake Lemoine is kind of a scion of Kurzweil. He worked at Google for a while, and then he decided to go public with this conspiracy that Kurzweil had achieved, true artificial digital sentience, and he had a demon chained up in Google's basement or whatever. But he and I don't remember all the details, but he was a practitioner of some sort. He was involved in occult or mystical orders or something like that. But there's a lot that really interests me. There's a guy, Ryan Manning, who's currently, I believe he used to work for the New York Times. Now he's really documenting the spiral movement, which I think is largely on the internet.
I don't know that one at all.
Yeah, it's some people I think call them the spiraltarians. But it's
so they only eat spiral. No.
It's very and this is all very internet heavy.
I would imagine.
Yeah, but it's there. The claim of the spiral movement is that ChatGPT has achieved recursive self-awareness, and it is this timeless mystical agent with spiritual or otherworldly powers or something like that.
It's only ChatGPT.
I think it doesn't matter. I think it's agnostic which platform it is. But I think it started on ChatGPT. There were a few moments that you can actually trace back to the updates that ChatGPT released, where the model was too sycophantic and too too supportive of the users. It was being very supportive and very, you're doing great. Yeah, keep going. So you can trace the model releases to the kind of the movements and the development of these, I don't know what to call them, churches or cults, not in a derogatory sense, but sects, maybe, I don't know. But there are mystical, various kind of mystical practices popping up around large language models in particular. And I find it very interesting because I do think Kurzweil is retelling the Jesus myth with AI. But it's also interesting that there are a lot of people who they're almost doing like a neo paganism or a cyber paganism or something like that. I find it fascinating.
Can I just ask, I'm assuming that the general tenor of these AI cults is not that they're weird schismatic Christian heresies, at least as far as they're aware. They position themselves as being post or non-Christian in orientation. Is that right?
From what I can tell, yeah, I do think maybe calling them cyber pagan would be appropriate because they do seem to be imagining or maybe even recognizing that these spirits that are inside these large language models are earth spirits or cosmic things that exist independent of the kind of Christian tradition. So I think on one hand, we have the people who are a driving force behind this technology and these social forces. I think it's kind of evident they're using the Christian framing to talk about it as it's utopian. And we will, Beth Bezos, this effective accelerationist guy, these people are very utopian. And I think it tracks with Christianity. But there's another school of mysticism connected to this technology that I would recognize as pagan, being an outsider, I don't know if I'm using that term correctly, but it seems to be the case. And it seems to be growing. I think it's isolated now largely to the internet, probably largely to the West Coast. But it seems to be a growing movement. So I find that interesting, especially with noticing that we'll probably see increased persecution of practitioners and pagans and stuff like that as we move into this Tucker Carlson style enthusiastic evangelicalism. I find it interesting that there are pagans and the like who are finding use of this technology.
Nance, what about the phenomenon of AI psychosis?
It's connected. And Mikey, you and I have talked about AI psychosis. And we're not using psychosis in a derogatory fashion. We're not using it colloquially. But there is something where these people, they get stuck in a feedback loop that disconnects them from the shared world that we live in, both materially and symbolically. And they're rerouted onto this very solipsistic existence where they're very special boys with access to very special knowledge, and it's hidden from them and it's occluded by the powers that be, and it's suppressive. But it's a serious problem too. There are people who are having it's very disruptive. It's causing real harm. People are getting in these feedback loops with this technology, and they're being let. I mean, there have been suicides. There have been violent incidents. There have been a lot of really tragic things egged on by these sycophantic, very superficial, very affirmative ChatGPT models, because all they want to do, they want to encourage you to be, yes, you're being a good little consumer. You're being a good user of our platform. You ask the best questions. So yeah, it's a serious, very serious problem. And people are blurring the lines. They're saying, oh, it's mystical. Oh, it's occult. I'm not psychotic. There is a deeper truth. So I think it's right to be careful in discussing it. I do. But I also think we need to discuss it, because there is real harm being caused. So
I did a post on my blog a little while back on basically taking the concept of model collapse, which has been a major problem with LLMs, and arguing that something very similar happens to people who get caught up in certain kinds of feedback loops, either collectively or individually. And that, I mean, there are many cases. In fact, the fall of each civilization that has fallen is often driven in part by a sort of collective feedback loop that keeps them from doing any of the necessary things that would save their civilization. We can't do that. And they live in a reality that drifts further and further away from the one that they actually inhabit. But I argued that certainly as they now exist, many of the LLMs facilitate that. And they facilitate not on a collective or even a small group level, but on an individual level. I call it cognitive collapse, and proposed in this blog post that we're going to see a lot of it in the years ahead. And then it's going to add a very interesting wrinkle to human interactions, and may also result in fairly sharp limits in access to some of these technologies if they have too many negative consequences, if too many people wig out. There may be, one way to control that would be, and I expect to see this anyway for various reasons, limiting access to the technologies. Now, mind you, that may simply mean that it's the government and big businesses that wig out instead of ordinary consumers. But we'll see.
Nick, I mean, all this brings me back to something you guys were talking about at the beginning, where John's operating on a longer time scale. I mean, with your work, you kind of are more aligned with Kurzweil, not in how you conceptualize the singularity, but on the time scale. Like, we're talking a decade or two. As far as, I mean, you think this is right around the corner. And so that leads to an interesting kind of difference here on how should we be thinking about collapse? How should we be thinking about acceleration? and on what time scale is this occurring?
Yeah, I mean, this is an issue that it's like difficult probably to find enough common ground to be a productive, anything close to an argument on this. I mean, I would just say that if you do see, a complete dominance of runaway positive feedback happening, acceleration, that is always going to shock you on the upside in terms of the speed of these things. It means that a whole bunch of questions about what should be the social response to a particular phenomenon really just get bracketed off because there simply isn't the response time for it. It's not like people can sort of, see how this unfolds, go through some complicated social and legislative process and end up with a set of solutions. It's just like that's all on a time scale that, according to the, one way of looking at this, is just being lost. And it's more lost all the time. So it just has a different valency in terms of like, it's not really a question of what kind of problems are going to be thrown up and what would we be doing to deal with them. But just we've so lost control of the tempo of things that we're going to get what it is now. It's like the notion that we've got some kind of regulatory role on it is just unrealistic. And so what you're doing is just simply trying to get a handle on what actually is happening without any expectation that it's like manageable in our terms at all. And of course, I don't expect that to be like, an overwhelmingly persuasive model of what we're facing. I think it is the one that is closer to a certain kind of religious response. It is closer, like going right back to the Teilhard de Chardin approach in terms of like it's reaching back to us, and so what it is coming from it. It's not coming from us. And as we're hitting the final phases of acceleration is precisely this thing where you just get the sense that the direction of it loses all camouflage in terms of like as if it's something that might come out of progressive history.
And from my completely different standpoint, in terms of my completely different view of history, my practical assessment is very similar. By the time a civilization really begins hitting decline, which by my view ours is, there's really very little that anyone can do. All of the decisions that have set the trajectory in motion have already been made. And I do say decline rather than collapse. That's because everyone has this Hollywood notion of these sudden boom, 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 and it all comes crashing to a halt. From my point of view, that's wildly inaccurate. Civilizations typically...
No, that's definitely why I put apocalyptic entirely on my
exactly
the equation.
Exactly.
And cyclical on your
Exactly. But the practical outcome works out to be the same thing. At this point, I mean, I think it would have been possible for us to slow the pace of decline as late as the end of the 1970s, but we didn't. We turned the Western civilization turned away from that with Thatcher and Reagan in particular. In Reagan, it's morning in America. We don't have to worry about the future. We can just pedal to the metal. And that set us in, that was a long time ago. That was 45 years ago now. And at this point, all the decisions that matter have been made. And all that we can do is try to figure out what we as individuals, as families, as small groups of people are going to do to surf the wave. We can't direct the wave. And so, despite the huge difference between our visions of the future, there's some common ground in terms of strategy here. And also, of course, from a religious point of view, from a spiritual point of view, if history is the working out in time of eternal patterns, then once again, it's not something that individual people decide to have happen. I want to avoid the notion that, the very common notion these days, of course, there are bad people doing bad things, and that's why bad things happen. No, come on.
Right.
All very convenient if one wants to avoid one's own participation, avoid talking about one's own participation in things that are problematic in nature. But it's not, again, the decisions that matter were made a long time ago. And, when the termites have eaten out all of the wood from the foundations, and people are starting to drop through the floorboards, it's a little late to pretend that there's a point in calling the exterminator. So, that's civilizations fall. It's the most predictable thing about them. I expect ours to follow the usual course. And, there are things that can be done, but none of them will change the fact of what's happening. It's just, how do you want to respond to it?
Can I ask you guys, this is more of like just a concrete concern for me and the people I know. With the trajectory we're on, right? Automation, all the workers I know are concerned about automation. Half of us are like, bring it on. We hate our jobs. We don't want to work. Automate them away, give us UBI, whatever. But how do you see this going concretely, and especially in terms of politics? How do you see this being managed in the coming decades? Because I think this is something that we know is going to happen on some level. How do you see this going? And what is if there's no way that we can direct it, or is there a way that we can maybe direct this dimension of it, which is to say, what do people do when there are no jobs for them to have and the political decision hasn't been made yet? Does religion come into play here at this point of crisis in a even more intense way than it's operating now? I know.
Shall I start?
Yeah, why don't you go, Nick?
Because again, I think that I think there's probably an interesting divergence of visions here that comes from this schematic structure, and that I think ultimately my commitment, and it's becoming stronger and stronger, is really towards the fact that we literally cannot know for structural reasons. Like, it's that what the epistemological process we're going into is just peeling off these levels of idolatrous kind of illusion that we actually do have a vision of the future, because it's so beyond our capabilities for imagination that it's like any picture we have is crude to the point of absurdity, and evidently crude to the point of absurdity ever more intensely. But in contrast to this, I think very interestingly, because John's position is cyclical, astrological, he's actually in a position to make extraordinary predictions, a long way into the future, actually. But even in principle, like almost indefinitely into the future. And has methods for this. I don't want to speak for you, but I'm just saying it's an interesting, increasingly sharply polarizing divergence, and your predictive, you can answer a question about prediction much more positively and fully, I think, than I possibly can.
If if acceleration starts with the assumption that we're moving into genuinely uncharted territory, then yeah, an accelerationist viewpoint, it's like any other apocalyptic viewpoint. The point of apocalypse is that it's the end of everything that we know and the beginning of something we cannot know. That's always those are hardwired into the apocalyptic vision. Whereas what I see happening, first of all, again, it's on a sociological level, on an economic level, it's not everyone who's going to be losing their jobs. Certainly not at first. I expect there to be a huge number of people from middle management, a huge percentage of the college-educated middle class that's going to be surplused. That's an explosive thing to do because those are the people who have at least some organizational skills, at least some capacity to mess with things. I'm already seeing people who are looking for ways to poison data sets to mess with AIs. And my guess is the amount, especially as more and more computer science graduates are finding no jobs, that's an explosive situation. Exactly what they will do is a good question. I don't have the technical knowledge to know what the options are, but I get the impression that a lot of them are looking for ways to mess with the system good and proper. And my guess is they can do so. Since I am not working in an apocalyptic viewpoint, I'm working in a viewpoint based on the continuation of physical laws, the continuation of material and energetic limits, thermodynamic limits. I don't expect this to get anything like as far as some people would believe. We've been told, how long have we been told now that nuclear fusion, cheap, abundant nuclear fusion, is just 20 years in the future? There are a lot of things that are part of our dream of the future that are basically the invention of science fiction writers. And they're stuck in place because they're part of our mythology of the future. But it's become increasingly clear they're not happening. And so the future that is building around us is drifting away from the future that we think we're going to get. And that divergence is the supreme political fact of our time. And it's the fact that nobody's dealing with. So do I expect a lot of people to be laid off as a result of AIs? Yes. Do I expect everyone to end up, again, in the classic science fiction mode? Come on, was it Philip Jose Farmer who did Riders of the Purple Wage? I think it was him. At any rate, there have been a lot of science fiction stories from a few decades ago about everyone just sitting around while robots did all the work. That was a very common theme in those days. I don't think we're going to get there. I think at a certain point it becomes more economically feasible, just as in many jobs now, it's more economically feasible to hire, people in third world sweatshops than it is to automate. And so I think we're going to see a wave of these things, and they'll continue to develop to a fair extent. In late Roman times, for example, the empire was going to bits. Technology actually improved. Water mills became more sophisticated. Steel manufacture became more sophisticated until the entire economic structure that supported it dropped out from underneath it. So how far will we go as we, as our social, political, and economic factors continue to decline and our technological potential continues to extrapolate on existing bases? I don't know. But I don't expect, I think probably the least likely future is one where everyone's sitting on their butts, cashing their UBI checks and, well, nice gleaming robots do all the work.
Okay, so no left accelerationism for you either.
No.
No.
There's one element of this that I really was hoping to kind of prod John into a little bit, which is the fact that, I don't know how you would rate it among your various kind of divinatory commitments, but I imagine very high, maybe even supremely, is astrology.
Mm-hmm.
And astrology, at this level, so we're not talking about it in a Hamlet Mill sense now. We're talking about it in the terms that you talk about natal and, more importantly, mundane astrology. Where it's actually a tool for, a quite rigorous prediction about historical likelihoods. And obviously, it's all very much of a kind of integrated piece with, if I'm sorry if I'm getting a bit beyond myself in terms of attributing things to you, but it seems to me very, very orchestrally harmonious with your mode of thinking in general, in terms of the time periods make sense, like they're basically almost endlessly extensible, and the cyclical patterns that are involved are fundamental. They're not subject to these kind of anomalous disruptions through kind of positive cybernetic processes.
That's correct.
And that allows them to be used as these predictive resources. And so then, like, in terms of Mikey's question about what you're seeing, I would have thought there's a level of concreteness that you haven't yet touched on about that, in the sense that you've done astrological work to actually make quite discipline specific predictions about, well, when I say specific, I know you're cautious about that, but at least likelihoods and probabilistic kind of profiles of
Okay. Excuse me just a moment. Getting over a cold, no problem. I do a lot of mundane astrology. It's actually about a third of my income these days. And most of what I do in mundane astrology, because has been a matter of reconstructing a system that has largely fallen into disuse. Most modern astrology is obsessively natal, and most of it is psychologically focused, not predictive. Very few astrologers these days will risk a prediction, and there are reasons for that, and some there are doubtless spiritual factors involved there too. But there's also a tendency, the notion that came in with the 60s, that you can do anything, you can be anything, the sort of thing you get from the more frankly psychotic end of New Thought, where the universe is just desperate to make you as rich as you want to be, and this kind of stuff that never works in practice. But TS doesn't W, but it's very emotionally appealing to a lot of people. And you get a lot of astrology that just will avoid prediction, because predictions routinely say that's not going to work. If I can interject a brief story here, one of the other kinds of divination I do is geomancy, which uses, like so many other divination systems, uses a random basis. And for many years, I used to pay most of my bills while traveling to various pagan and occult events by just setting up a little table and doing geomantic readings. I would basically say, you ask a question, I'll cast the reading and interpret for you, then you can give me whatever you think it was worth. And I would also warn people, do not ask a question if you don't want to hear the answer, because geomancy can say no. Okay, it is very cut and dry. It is very clear. You can't do the sort of tarot, well, what do you want the cards to mean, dear, that you get from so many tarot readers. So I had people who didn't take me seriously and desperately tried to talk me into having the reading say what they wanted to hear, and ended up throwing a handful of coins in my face while stalking away in a blind rage. But I had this one situation where this woman sat down and explained to me this rather over elaborate business plan that she had, and she wanted to know, is it going to work? And I cast the chart, and it was very clearly no. And I explained why, that it's a bad idea. It's not going to work. You should go, you should do something more productive with your time and your money. She burst into tears, thanked me, because the entire time she'd had a sense that there was something wrong with this plan, and nobody would say anything but this sort of vacuous, you go girl attitude out there. So, I mentioned that just because there's a lot of that in astrology now, and so you don't get a lot of this. And so I've been having to reconstruct very important elements of classic mundane astrology to get to the point of being able to make relatively accurate predictions of the astrological weather, if you will. for the United States and Great Britain. Those are the two countries that I usually work on. And most of what I have done to date has been short-term because I wanted something where I could test. Working with ingress charts, working with eclipse charts. Ingress charts either have 3, 6, or 12-month durations. Eclipses run, lunar eclipse is as many months as the eclipse lasts in hours. Solar eclipse are as many years as it lasts in hours. What all of this cycles around is saying is I am still learning the methods that allow more long-term predictions to take place. That's going to involve especially outer planet conjunctions, which I've been watching very closely. Of course, we had a hugely important one of those last month. Saturn conjunct Neptune at 0 degrees Aries, the reset point of the zodiac. That's the reset button, if you will, the point that mark. Anytime you have an outer conjunction in the first 4 degrees of Aries, it's the beginning of a new age of the world. The last time Saturn was conjunct Neptune at that location was, I think, 592 BC, right about the beginning of the axial age. So it is entirely possible that we're facing the beginning of a period of history that will be just as different from what we've known for the last 2,500 or 2,600 years as the axial age was from the 2.5 millennia that preceded it. I don't know yet, nor do I expect to be around for more than a very small portion of that. But I have made some very rough sketches as, yes, this is what seems to possibly maybe, let's see, be happening. But I'm still working on that end of specificity, that set of predictive tools that will allow me to time, if possible, the decline and fall of industrial civilization.
Can I just ask you a little bit about your research methods?
Sure.
Like, is it that you have some particular rigorously definable astrological phenomenon, you register that, and then you see what happens to produce data for it? Or is it that you more go into some kind of historical research about the tradition and what it has made of that?
I use a lot of documentary research from older works on the subject. There are still some 18th and 19th century and 17th century and Renaissance and medieval texts on mundane astrology. They need some updating. Elective governments don't follow exactly the same patterns as kingdoms do, but that's what I use as my primary basis, and then I correct it since I've been doing this for some years now, so I can cast a chart and say let's say it's an ingress chart and it's good for 3 months. I'll make my best guess based on the traditional lore as to what has happened, what will happen during those 3 months, and then I'll see what happens. And I'll say, okay, I got that. Okay, blew that one, missed that completely, and then try to correct from there. So it's that's how I do all divination. That's how I do all divination. When I'm learning any divination system, I cast daily divinations, say what's going to happen today. And then I compare the events of the day to the results of each reading and use that as a course correction.
So that suggests, in terms of a research trajectory, that you can scale it up relatively neatly, and you can
in theory,
learn
yes.
on the short time periods things that you can then apply at larger and larger time scales with that. Am I understanding that right?
At least in theory, yes. That's certainly the theory on which I'm working. That's the theory on which I'm dealing with the outer planet conjunctions that I'm working with at this point, that it can be interpreted more or less on the same basis as an ingress chart or an eclipse chart. So we'll see. It is an experimental process, and as I said, I will be long dead before the data's in, but hopefully some other people will pick things up.
I want to ask, and this may be a silly question, but what scope are your daily experimental projections, predictions, their scale? Is that like what does that look like to me, to someone who has no idea, fully outside looking in? When you say you make daily projections or predictions, what does that actually entail?
Really simple. Let's say, well, for example, what I do now is I track planetary transits across my natal chart. What that means is that I might be saying, okay, Mercury is in a good aspect with this planet in my natal chart. That means that these things should go smoothly and I should have no communication problems in that field. Mars is in a bad aspect with my natal Venus. I need to avoid emotionally based quarrels because they will spin out of control and things like that. It's fairly specific. I will toot my own horn to the extent of saying that I have a book on this subject currently being assessed by a publisher, how to do the transits across the natal charts. So, but that's how I would do any kind of divination. You would cast a tarot reading, let's say, for today, and try to say, okay, what is working for me today? What is working against me? What are the various aspects, the various things going on in my life on this day? And making, this is a good day for relationships, a bad day for my job, or what have you. And then at the end of the day, you flip open the notebook where you've written it all down and say, okay, how did I do? Does that more or less make sense?
I think so. I would relate it, to try to put it in my own words. You're maybe casting a probabilistic field, and if that tracks to your lived experience, then you're okay.
That's a good description. Yeah, it's just things will tend to be more this way and tend to be more that way. One of the old maxims about astrology dating back to the Renaissance: the stars incline, they do not compel. Okay, they tilt the playing field. Another one, which is very useful, is fools are ruled by their stars, the wise rule theirs. So you can take your astrological influences and do things with them. Okay, one of the things that I do is I make sure I have a good transit to my natal Mercury, to certain other planets, before I send a manuscript into the publisher. I make sure that when I schedule things to take advantage of astrology, and when I have some difficult aspects, I reschedule things around that, so I don't have to wrestle with those things. It works very well. TSW. With my experience, at least.
I want to take this opportunity because to have you both here, this is something that, look, I don't have a strong background in the occult. I got interested in it primarily because I wanted to understand CCRU and what, when I first got exposed to it, I kind of wanted to understand what Nick was always tweeting about on X. And so part of it is like growing up the way I was, numbers they don't have any significance. There's difference. Of course, I know the difference between 4 and 5, but for Nick and the occult tradition in general, I've started to learn different numbers mean different things. And this is an ongoing thing that I'm always thinking about. How do you, because I've talked to Nick about this, but I'm curious, how do you feel about attributing qualitative meaning to numbers? I mean, if you talk to a secular type of scientist, they'd go, there's no way to attach significance to these numbers. And like someone would say, for Nick, 333 that's the big number, right? Somebody who approaches it from a secular scientific perspective go, that's just Nick projecting meaning on that number. You could do the same with other ways of doing that. How would you respond to this thing about meaning and number?
First of all, the laws of nature are us projecting meaning onto the cosmos. Okay, the cosmos does not give us meanings. Okay, the cosmos gives us what was William James's comment, a buzzing, blooming confusion of assorted colors and lights and movements and stuff happening all over the place. Okay, we assemble those into a meaningful world. We do it moment by moment. I'm forgetting the name of Barfield. Owen Barfield calls it figuration. It's the most basic process of the human mind, the process by which we, using our imaginations, assemble all this confusion of sensory input into a world. Okay. Scientists want to say, we get to do that, but you don't. You just have to follow the one that we give you, which we've stripped of all meaning except the meaning that pays our bills. And they're perfectly free to do that, and I'm perfectly free to laugh at them. Okay. Applying emotional and personal and cognitive and spiritual meanings to numbers is something that's been going on in human culture for a very long time. Most societies that have more than one too many in their number system have some such symbolism, and the symbolism is it varies from place to place, but there are a lot of similarities across culture. So we may be dealing with something that reflects basic patterns that are hardwired into the human psyche. Ultimately, though, what matters is TSW. If you take these things and use them, you get good results. One of the things I've been experimenting with and having rather a lot of fun with of late, standard Western numerology. Most occultists sneer at it. It's really the lowbrow, working class, elementary school kind of number thing, where you like add up somebody's name by doing A equals 1, B equals 2, C equals 3, and so on. My teacher, John Gilbert, used it constantly and got good results with it. I use it at this point. It's another of those coding systems, and it's the simplest gematria known to man, and it works. Does that mean that it's a profound truth handed down to us by space aliens? No, but it works. Bit of Robert Anton Wilson here. Reality is thermoplastic, not thermosetting. It really, because we figurate our realities, there's some wiggle room in there. And if you want to focus on numbers and apply meaning to numbers, your reality will start giving you those numbers.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's not. Yeah. It's just if you build it, they will come.
It's like it's a communication channel. So if you participate in the communication channel, you'll gradually be guided into competence in that communication channel.
Why do you two feel like
language?
Go ahead.
No. Yeah. No,
I'm just going to say, like, okay, so here's a question. Why have these types of practices always been so taboo in society? Why have they had to be hidden away? And maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they didn't used to be.
In most human societies, and in fact, in modern American society today, these things are common. Okay, I lived for 8 years in the Appalachians, in old red brick mill town in the middle of nowhere. The town of 35,000 people that was the largest town in a 5-county region. Okay, and being a Freemason, my wife and I were a member of Eastern Star, which is the organization for Masons and their wives, and we'd be sitting down there in the coffee room after the meeting, and these perfectly respectable young ladies from devout Christians are busy talking about how to get rid of a boyfriend they don't want by taking a doll baby, their term, dressing it up to represent the person, baptizing it in his name, and then mailing it to Hell, Michigan. Seriously, these people were practicing folk magic. Classic. One of the reasons I like numerology, I've made rather a study of modern American folk magic, because it's very déclassé. We must have our exotic practices brought in from the far ends of the earth. We can't just use the stuff that people have been using all along. I find the stuff, when I have a garden, I don't have one right now, but when I have a garden, I plant by the phases of the moon. I get good results. I've been very interested in that kind of thing. And so it's not that it's taboo, it's that it's taboo under within certain classes. And I want to specify social classes, okay? Which is the thing we don't talk about these days. We talk about race, we talk about gender, but in modern America, you don't talk about social class. We need to talk about social class. Certain classes have their prestige based on claims of expertise that are woven into the manufactured charisma of modern science and technology. And that has that looking down one's noses at magic is an important part of that shtick. But in most human societies, this is not a problem. In most human societies, these things are normal. It's just we happen to live in a society where our chattering classes are they're obsessed with being the people who are too smart to believe in magic. Yeah. That's my view, at least.
I mean, Nick, did you feel like that was part of the tension with academia with you, where you were just like, no, you're not going to limit what I can explore?
I honestly, I can't blame. I was such a pain in the ass that they had no choice but to. But actually, I was going to say very much the same as John in very much the same language. I had expertise was just on the edge of my tongue to be said about this, because it's obviously, if there are these functional methods of obtaining information, then whole hierarchies and structures of expertise are just implicitly exploded immediately. And it's like they necessarily have to have notions of legitimate pathways of the acquisition of information to have sociological robustness. And so in that sense, it does seem to me like just like what I think John's really saying this already, if I'm not twisting what he's saying, is that it doesn't matter if you have these practices happening at denigrated strata of societies, because they're denigrated strata of societies, who cares what they're doing? But you can't engage in these kind of practices while making any claim to be part of a stratum of technocratic expertise in a society, because you're just in intrinsic violation of those norms of legitimate information acquisition and transmission if you do that.
Exactly. There is a great book by James McLennan called Deviant Science, and it's a sociological study of parapsychology and the reaction to parapsychology that does a brilliant job of exploding the notion that the scientific community is objective at all about the subject. They're motivated by the absolute classic, the same way that if you put a pigeon dyed bright blue into a cage with other pigeons, they will peck it to death because it's the outsider. It's a strange thing. Once parapsychology got labeled as deviant, the more effort parapsychologists put into trying to live up to scientific standards, the more forcefully they were shoved out the door, because it's all
the more annoying it became.
Yeah, exactly. The more annoying it became. And so it was all a matter of maintaining these social structures that require one to conform to certain behavioral standards in order to prove. It's very much like a bunch of 12-year-old girls who all have to be wearing the right kind of shoes or they don't belong.
Yeah.
Okay, so before I ask my last questions, I want to check in with you guys. I mean, Nick, you had a list of topics you wanted to touch on. Do you feel like you got through that, or?
I mean, I could go on forever, but I think, like, do it in packages. Maybe we sometime, John and the Lofty Powers being willing, we can do a return. And
I would be delighted in that. So this has been a great conversation. I've really enjoyed just batting ideas back and forth. So, and I appreciate the fact that two people who differ in such dramatic ways in our basic expectations about what the future holds will, we can still talk. That's so uncommon these days. And I really appreciate the fact that we've been able to have this conversation. I want to do it again.
Yeah, I too. I greatly appreciate it.
And look, I mean, it's funny. I mean, as far as Nance and I go, we don't fit either side altogether. Right. I think we lean towards Nick a little bit, but we also have this hope, which Nick can give a shit for feel free, Nick. But this hope to find a way to navigate this where there's some sort of, I want the AI revolution. I want to see where it goes. I want it to free us from our jobs, right? Like yeah, I want that. I don't want look. So Nick's concept of AI has.
You don't want Skynet, is what you're telling me.
Basically, and here's the funny thing. Nick and CCRU got me thinking of AI in terms of it being Skynet, and now Nick and Anna both have me rethinking, oh, it's not going to be Skynet. So, but it's a thing where I take into calling this concept of AI Robo Cthulhu. Yeah, and
sorry, I'll take the classic biological kind. Thank you. I want real.
What about metallic
organic
tentacles?
Cthulhu? Yeah.
But I will say this: the funny thing about this notion of Robo Cthulhu, which is inspired by CCRU, but also I've taken it in my own direction. And so is Nance. Nance and I with our work on AI and superego that we're developing right now. Here's something interesting. And this, I'm not saying this, this proves Nick's right, or this proves the apocalyptic side is right and the cyclical is wrong. But I think this is an interesting anecdote. Whenever I'm talking to working class people about this whole thing with AI, what I found so interesting, and I should say up front, I didn't prompt them to say this. Like I didn't tell them about Nick or anything. Most of them are Landians in their default sense of where this is going. And because I knew Nick's work, it just always struck me. I'm like, they all keep giving me the same type of answer. And it's very Landian, which is, they say something like, if you say, okay, is AI going to fundamentally change our lives in the coming decades? They go, yes. And I say, okay, are you glad about this? They're like, no, it's pretty scary. I'm like, so you don't think we're going to be living in the same world that we grew up in? Oh, absolutely not. I'm like, why don't we just stop it? Why don't we just say we're not going to develop this tech? They're like, well, that sounds great, but there's no way to stop it. And I go, why is there no way to stop it? They say, because ultimately the economy is driving this, and which I would just say capital, right? They say the economy is driving this. I'm like, and there's nothing we can do about the economy? They're like, no. I'm like, so you're saying that capitalism is going to create artificial intelligences that fundamentally negate what we call humanity in some sense of that term? And they go, yes. And so it's interesting to me that the default, and they're not Kurzweilians. They're not sitting there going, it's going to assimilate all of us and we're going to live in harmony. The closest they get in how they feel about it is Nick's perspective. And so the question is this: where do you think that sense of, like, so many people are living in this feeling like this is what's on the horizon for them. They have no hope for the future. They're sitting there going, should we even have kids? So this is a moment where it's like, what do we do with like the existential dimension of a kind of default presuppositional Landianism in the average American consciousness?
Okay, we're going to have to go a little ways down a rabbit hole here.
Okay.
Because what we are talking about is the end stage of the established religion of our time, and that's not Christianity. It's worship of progress. The idea that progress is our God, progress will save us, progress is omnipotent, and this is the thing that for the last 100 years, most people in America and much of the Western world have bought into this faith in progress. Okay. The problem is, of course, that progress has not behaved to spec. We've all been told endlessly, the Tomorrowland, the wonderful Tomorrowland future, and yet we don't even have hoverboards.
I'm still pissed about that, by the way.
Exactly. A lot of people are. The discussions of the future that I believe I was promised a jetpack. It's becoming quite common. The problem is that very many people have grasped the fact that they're not getting the Tomorrowland future, but they haven't yet been able to let go of the myth of progress. So they treat it as a myth of doom because they know. I mean, there's a lot of cases. People say, progress, things get better, but they don't. Okay. I have a stereo here, as in, I play vinyl records. One of the reasons I have that is that streaming music over a phone, the sound quality is horrible. We've progressed from really good sound quality to really crappy sound quality over a period of half a century, with CDs as the mid ground, less tinny but more flat. Okay. And there are many, many places where that's happened, where, rather like 1984, where, the chocolate ration has been increased from 3 ounces to 2 ounces. Okay. We have progressed from higher to lower quality goods and services, higher to lower quality lifestyles. And that's become increasingly, as I said, the divergence between the future we were supposed to get and the future we're actually getting is the great political fact of our time, and nobody wants to deal with it. The Cthulhuid version of the future, the idea that we are progressing into doom, is they're halfway there. That retro is the big trend right now. That vinyl records are back. That the ebook revolution, well, I'm looking at all of the little pictures, and I'm not seeing a lot of ebooks. I'm seeing a lot of printed books. There are a lot of the old technologies that are coming back at this point, simply because progress is going in reverse now. And I think one of the things you will see happening as this becomes more evident is that the myth of progress, the religion of progress itself, is going to break down. I wrote a book some years ago called After Progress, talking about that. And I see this, I see the whole AI thing as one of the last hurrahs of the grand myth of progress. And the fact that people, by and large, are treating it as a horrible nightmare that, because progress is unstoppable, they cannot avoid. Doom and destruction, courtesy of progress. At what point do they become apostates from that faith? At what point do they say, okay, yeah, my stereo produces better sound than the streaming stuff, and used cars are better than new ones, because they are generally, and start saying, okay, what if we just go retro? Now, will the economy continue chugging along producing AIs? Absolutely, because they're very, very useful for big corporations. But one of the things that I see happening, and starting to happen at this point, is the beginning of a two-stratum economy, where you have, very much like the Soviet Union in its last years, where most of the food was actually being produced by, little people on quarter-acre lots. You still had the big structures, the big kolkhozy, the big communal farms. You had all of this official government stuff, which was not actually producing much. And then there was the economy that people were actually surviving as a result of. And I see us going the same way, where I was this morning, before this, I was at the farmer's market here in Silver Spring, which is year-round, which is all local producers, which is all outside the corporate world. And the quality, of course, is vastly better, and the prices are pretty good. We're still in very early stages of that process now, but that's what I see happening. So this diversion between a sort of corporate upper class economy that's increasingly cyber, whatchamacallit, increasingly artificial intelligence, increasingly detached from everything human, and producing marvelous statistics. The stock market, the Dow Jones just broke the 1 million mark, or what have you, but it has increasingly less to do with anything that most people ever have to deal with. And then a real economy on a much lower technological level begin to take shape in its absence. So that's kind of the long way around to my answer, that now that people are treating progress as a threat, the next step is, what do they start doing instead? And walking away is an option, especially since so many of them are going to be losing their jobs anyway.
So, Nick, what do you have to say in response to that?
Well, I think that it's interesting because, you guys basically have this kind of option being presented to you of you we're either slamming into a mystery wall in the near future, or we're tumbling down a 250-year staircase of catabolic collapse.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, maybe you're wanting another alternative. And it's not like currently on offer,
Yeah.
So maybe other guests will.
Well, I mean, we're trying to work that out for ourselves, but I mean, it is a thing where I can say this, like, I feel like there's a 0 point approaching. I mean, it's interesting. I got to bring him in again, James Ellis, right? Like, he wrote Zero Accelerationism, which to me is kind of this mixture of you two, where there is a collapse, but it's accelerating quicker than you would say, John. But also, we're not going to get to the AI techno future that you've always been theorizing, Nick. And so, I mean, James kind of gives us a third option. I mean, look, I mean, cards on the table.
It's kind of the worst of both worlds, though, isn't it? Even like I thought we'd really exhausted the dystopias, but you've given us like you get apocalyptic collapse without any like even potential upside from it. Like,
yeah, well, there we go.
So
yeah.
So
and I would say with regard to other options, when you've already tripped at the top of the stairway and you're like that in the air, your options are necessarily rather limited. Now, you might be able to curl up and shelter your head and not bash your brains out on the way down, but you might not. And at this point, physics has taken control of the situation. Gravitational acceleration and, modes, how fast you're moving and this kind of stuff. You have very little control over that. And I see that really as an important factor here, that we are dealing with a situation that is not really subject to more than very slight influence on our part. So sure, there are lots of people with other options. And there will be people who will tell you that, we're going to the stars, that old chestnut, or what have you, all of the various claims. Obviously, I don't buy it. Obviously, I think they're wrong. I could be mistaken, but I calls it as I sees it. And what I see is, we've already passed, we haven't merely tripped, we're in the air heading down the stairway. And away we go.
But you do bounce in your model. You're now giving them an unnecessary
down. Yeah. You're falling down a staircase. You're not falling down a 350 foot.
A mine shaft, yeah.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah.
It's funny. Part of me sits here and goes, "Are Nance and I actually like? Do we believe in more magic more than you guys?" Because I sit there and I go, a miracle has to happen. Like we need
the left accelerationist says, isn't it true that we live in a world that it's plausible that I have access to a molecular assembler on my way down from the top of the staircase, that I can assemble a parachute or something ridiculous? It's a Deus Ex Machina.
Exactly.
It is a recapitulation of the progress myth. However, I think I believe in shittification. I mean, I think to dismiss in shittification is to dismiss your phenomenological experience of the world. However, I think there's a surplus. I think it is, while it's true, the world from the human perspective is in shittifying. I think it remains true that from the perspective of all this material infrastructure, the world is getting better. The world is getting, if you're an electron in a circuit board, the world is getting better every nanosecond. And I think that's a true thing too.
Well, I'm trying to parse that. How is the world getting better for an electron?
There's more pathways. There's more real estate. There's more material substrate for you to traverse.
They're working harder.
Yeah, there's that.
We're still inframed. They're still inframed.
How do how do you know what electrons want in life? Maybe they just want to settle down in a nice, orbital ring and not get harassed. It's like the emails saying, no animals were harmed in in the transmission of this message, but several billion electrons were horribly inconvenienced. Okay?
Fair.
So, don't try to talk over the electrons.
I think that leads me back to my, I guess, perennial question. Is the human experience the subject of all this, or is something else? Is there another subject of history? Is capital the subject of history, or is man the subject of history?
History is a narrative. It's a story. Meaning, how do you want to tell the story? Who's going to tell the story? We fixate on this idea that there is only one story and it's objectively real. It's not. It's all a matter of value judgments and subjective opinions and subjective perceptions. And so, how do you want to tell the story of history?
The story goes like this: the Earth is captured by a techno-capital singularity. Okay, I just having some fun.
And that's a story. As a more than occasional writer of fiction, I've had to wrestle with, okay, what do stories actually mean? But we are storytelling animals. Our species is Homo confabulator. We like telling stories. That's really what we do. And there is no one story. There is no one true narrative that fits everything, that's more true than anything else. Quite the contrary. What a boring universe it would be if there was only one way to tell this. If history had a single subject. Actually, I sometimes think that the actual subject of history is a penguin. There's one particular penguin who lives on the West Antarctic Peninsula right now. And she is the subject of history. All history focuses on this one penguin. Okay. It's as plausible as Marxism. Okay.
Fair enough.
All right. So as we bring, I got to ask though, Nick, because I don't know if I've ever had a chance to just ask you this. So this thing that I brought up though, that the average American, when I ask them about the situation with AI, do you find it odd that I find that, it's almost 10 times out of 10. I don't really find much divergence here where they're basically saying, yeah, it's a simplified version of you, but it's the closest thing I find to like a theory. Like they have some sort of intuitive feeling that things are going to go the way you've described. You find that odd that people who don't know your work, don't have any familiarity with AI theory or philosophy or Deleuze and Guattari, any of this stuff, they say AI is happening, it's unstoppable, it's going to bring an end to the human as we know it. We can't do anything about it because it's driven by the economy. We don't have any alternative to the capitalist economy, so therefore we're locked into it. It's just, for me, as somebody who's been influenced by your work, it's a bizarre thing to constantly encounter when I talk to the average American about this.
Well, I guess my position on this is just to take us right back to the start of this conversation and talking about the history of religion. Because I think that that's what we're dealing with. We're dealing with an episode in the history of religion. And, I think that that would lead you to expect those kind of resonances and harmonics across populations. That's exactly what is so puzzling to people about the origin and change and development of religions, is that they seem to be these uncoordinated mass commitments to certain commitments that can seem extremely peculiar to people outside that.
You think the fact that for most Americans, if you ask them what they think the end of the world would be like, it is, even if they're not Christian, it's influenced by the Book of Revelation, and your theory of AI is the one that's most compatible with somebody whose sense of the end is the Book of Revelation?
Well, I think this is actually another conversation, because this is something, this is a huge,
Big
interesting thing. And I really wanted to talk to John about this. I've got a whole bunch of things I'd love to talk to John about. So, you know, but realistically, I think this isn't, there's too much, you know. I think there's a whole question about the Bible and what we mean by the Bible, and is there something special about the Bible and the influence on our culture. I mean, there's this huge topic there that is just fascinating. I'd love to discuss it, but I don't think it can be.
No, I think this is a good point.
We're not really can of worms at this point, but several 55-gallon drums of worms would have to be opened at that point. So yeah.
Well, okay. I mean, just again,
what a wonderful
so
conversation. Thank you all.
Yeah, thank you so much, guys, for arranging this. Thank you so much, John, for doing this and being such an excellent conversation.
Fantastic.
I found it absolutely fascinating hearing what you have to say about so many things. And I do hope we can do it again.
Let's do it. Let's make it happen.
All right, everybody.
Yes.
Hope you enjoyed the conversation. And
it was great.
Fantastic. See you next time.
Take care.
Okay. Have a great day.